Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I just want to first start off that I'm really excited to be a part of this panel and asked to be the moderator. As you can see here in our panel, we've got an esteemed group, and you guys are in for a treat because it's been hard for me, quite honestly, to meet other folks that are doing both data science, AI, and cybersecurity. So these folks are the true experts, and you guys are going to get really good content and answers, and hopefully I'll post some good questions. But thanks for AI4 for bringing us all together, and Michael. So I'll pass it over to introductions, and I'll start with Marina.
Thanks, Brennan. Hi, everybody. Very happy to be here. My name is Marina Kaganovich. I'm a director at BNP Paribas Corporate and Institutional Banking Compliance team. I look after a couple of related topics. I look at data privacy, cybersecurity, and I also support the firm's digital transformation initiatives. So I support the build out of our robotics and AI efforts. So prior to joining BNP, I had actually started my career in a law firm and then quickly transitioned to a dual role supporting both the legal and the compliance departments of Thomson Reuters Financial and Risk Division, which has now been rebranded to Refinitiv, where I primarily focused on supporting the firm's broker-dealer entity. I then made the jump into a more sort of tech-heavy role, I guess, and I went to Goldman Sachs, where I looked after the technology division and included the cybersecurity teams, which was a really exciting opportunity because it was a completely new role that was created. So there was quite a bit of a learning curve, but also a lot of space to kind of make your mark. A few years after Goldman, I then transitioned to BNP and continued in the technology and digital space.
Many thanks, Marina. Marcus.
Sure, thanks, Brennan, and certainly thank you to AI4. It's good to be here. My name is Marcus Fowler. I'm the Director of Strategic Threat at Darktrace. Darktrace is an artificial intelligence company that's focused on cybersecurity. So this is the perfect forum for us because we do both of these two things, and that's all we focus on. In terms of my background, I spent the last, actually I've only been at Darktrace for about a year. Prior to that, I spent 15 years at the CIA, where I was focused on nation-state threats as well as counterterrorism, and both the operations side as well as emerging and next-generation technologies and how they can be employed for mission value. Prior to that, I served in the Marine Corps, and I also got my master's degree in international security studies. So I've been focused on the security space more broadly for about 23 years. And it's great to be here. It's great to be part of the panel.
Thanks, Marcus. Over to you, James.
Yeah, so my name's Major James Lindsay. I'm with the Canadian military. I actually joined the military when I was 16 years old and coming up on my 20-year mark. Much like every military officer, I spent the first half of my career kind of in the field, doing a lot of more tactical computer networks and stuff like that. Went to Afghanistan in 2009 where I commanded 71 soldiers. After Afghanistan, I went to do my master's in robotics. And we got a bunch of papers published, a lot of stuff trying to use a lot of the Afghanistan environment. Won a bunch of awards from the Minister of National Defense up here in Canada. And of course, when you publish a lot in one area, the military loves to put you in a completely different field. So after my master's, I got put in cybersecurity because that was the flavor of the month in 2011, and worked my way up to leading the endpoint protection or the endpoint security program for the Department of National Defense right now. Got a little bored a couple years ago, and I was really excited with a lot of the work we had done during my master's. So right now I'm doing a part-time PhD in deep reinforcement learning. So I was doing that for a couple years, and all of a sudden, kind of starting 2017, the whole field of artificial intelligence really hit the military and a lot of the geopolitics that are involved really hard. So everyone was just looking for AI experts. I kind of fit the bill. So now I do a lot of advising on how best to integrate artificial intelligence into cybersecurity defense. And like I say, I love this panel because I think much like everyone, everyone's either, and it's already been said, everyone's either a cybersecurity expert or an AI expert, and there's very few people who are experts in both areas. So very excited to be on this panel.
Well said, James. And I'll finish up with myself. So I'm Brennan Lodge. I lead a data science team at Goldman Sachs, and we support our SIRT, so our Security Incident Response Team. And we're developing quite a bit of few things there. First and foremost, a platform to roll out some of our data science use cases, and of course, data science that can help out with analytics, reporting, machine learning, automation. I think we've covered, or attempt to cover a lot under that AI umbrella. And back to the panel here, I wasn't joking when we've got an esteemed panel here from a variety of different backgrounds: government, private sector, public sector, the vendor side, the enterprise side. And we'll see here, with the questions that we'll ask them about what their take is on AI for cybersecurity and, our industry, which, is struggling quite a bit in order to thwart against attackers. However, defense wins championships here, and hopefully we can up our blue teams and the ability for them to defend against all the cybersecurity attacks going on in the industry. So I'll pause there. A few administrative items. I think you can see at the bottom of your screen, Q&A option, chat option. So feel free to post any questions there. It's going to be really tough for me to multitask, but some of the other panel members and Michael may help answer some of these questions as we go on. So feel free to post your questions there. So here we go. Let's get right into it. The first question, and this is apropos to the environment right now. So has COVID impacted your cybersecurity programs, and has AI alleviated any of that impact? A really important question given these different times. Really, the threat landscape has tremendously changed with a majority of people working from home, right? That changes how blue teams and defenders are adjusting it with their detections. Now, back to the AI portion, how has that alleviated, or has it helped in any way for your programs? So I'll start with Marina there.
Thanks, Brennan. I'm just going to also get a quick housekeeping matter out of the way, and just say for the panel and for the audience that the views that I express in this panel are my own and don't represent those of BMP. And I think to answer your question, I think the COVID-19 pandemic has absolutely impacted firms' cybersecurity programs across the financial industry. It's stressed our bandwidth, and it's forced digital transformation at a tremendous pace to both support business needs and to enable remote working on frankly an unprecedented scale. And with so many folks working remotely, I think that the industry has observed a significant uptick in phishing attacks, and also a number of folks, at least in the financial services industry where this ability is typically blocked, a number of folks trying to either send materials out of the firm or to send them back in, all of which obviously constitutes a cyber risk that needs to be addressed. So where I think that AI can help is in blocking the phishing attempts, and in identifying ransomware, and overall in reducing the noise from the many alerts that our cyber teams are seeing at this time, in order to open up some free time for the investigations that actually require more judgment and human intervention. And I think that as a general matter, we just need to be mindful that AI is trained on historical data. And so as we've shifted to a new normal, or I like to think sort of near-term normal, the AI needs to be tweaked accordingly to take into account these changes, because what used to be anomalous behavior in the past may no longer be anomalous behavior today. So the false positives would need to be reviewed, and I think the cyber teams should be evaluating and adjusting thresholds based on this new normal environment.
Yeah, great points. Especially with the enrichment, which I think AI kind of gets slated on some of those implementations, right? When you think of AI, you may think of AI as prediction, or saying this is the definitive answer as to an attack in the cybersecurity domain. But that's not always the case. It can add the enrichment, it can add the automation piece, and a few other factors. So great points there, Marina. Over to you, Marcus. Your thoughts.
Sure, and I think certainly out of the gate, you had, as this thrust in terms of work from home, you had really prioritization of business operations and maintaining those, right, in that transition in which security and all these teams had to play catch up, right? Because the priority was, if we don't have anything to secure, it doesn't matter. So let's make sure the business continues to run. So you had this giant move that security teams were pressed to catch up on. So I think that was certainly a significant event, and also changed, how they were working, that work from home paradigm and the things that they were relying on, right? In terms of cybersecurity and how their tool stack was, how ready were they for all of these VPNs? How many VPN licenses did they have? How prepared were their workforce to deal with all these spear phishing, which we've seen? I think, you're looking at, or people are starting to put an eye towards, what does that return home look like, right? And I think, what is there another spike? Are there going to be a whole bunch of devices that have been already owned out there that are quiet, that are going to be back into your home network, right? Or your corporate network? To those companies, I would make one point, and that is, you had to rush out and security had to catch up, but you don't have to sprint back. And thinking about a phased approach in terms of how you come back and how you do it. Now, whatever the next normal is going to be, not everybody's going to come back, or whether it is, allow security to be in lockstep. In terms of AI, for us at least, the Darktrace approach is using unsupervised learning, and we actually were quite surprised at how the visibility and the transition, it caught up fairly quickly in terms of re-normalizing or re-baselining, right, in that transition, to allow for it to really allow a lot of our customers to feel very comfortable in their security posture as they move, because the AI was transitioning with them in that complex environment and then alerting against it. So I think that was something that we, even ourselves, and again, you could never test this to say, how would we adapt in some of this massive change? We're now looking at it and go, wow, that adapted fairly quickly and was very, whether baseline or that real-time situational awareness was so important, and that allowed that to do that. And I would absolutely agree with the enhanced email and what they're seeing. You have an entire workforce that is so distracted, so anxious. They're starving for any little piece of information about COVID, whether it's from their company or is their state going back. That is a perfect time for those attackers, right? This really is a great moment for all of those attackers out there, unfortunately, to take advantage in any number of ways. So but I do think AI, it can play a critical role, especially building time for that security team.
Many thanks, Marcus. Yes, the game has changed, right, for the threat landscape, and then for the data, right? Our networks are changed. The IP space has changed for us to learn and detect. And you mentioned unsupervised, models, right? So what is the new anomaly, right? We've got a new environment, a new threat vector, right? So that has to adjust within itself in order for our AI to adjust and better predict or find anomalies. So really great points. James, over to you.
Yeah, more to really echo Marina's points. From a government and military perspective, this has been a very fast change for us. So usually, D&D is not a ship or any government organization are not ships that turn on a dime type thing. But when everyone gets ordered within a weekend to start working from home, that ship has to turn on a dime. So we've increased a lot within the cloud. So a lot of cloud presence means a lot of cloud security. From an AI perspective, this is very exciting for the simple fact that most governments, militaries, etc., can't use a lot of cloud-based resources, and AI usually requires connections to the cloud, because of the GPU processing and training of the neural nets, etc., etc. There's a lot of reasons why you need to use the cloud type thing. So this has forced significant sea change within the government and how it operates type thing, which is going to lead to the government being able to use a lot more AI tools. Where do I see AI being used right now is more dealing with regression algorithms type thing. So right now, say your SOCs, you don't have an entire SOC actually on the floor anymore. A lot of people are, say, working from home to support that SOC type thing. So say your incident responders, as they do investigations, you aren't going to have as many people on the team able to do those investigations, but using regression algorithms, you can get those investigators the information they require, and being able to, use things like unsupervised learning to find anomalies instead of people trying to do it on their own. So using AI to enhance the people that you currently have on the ground is really where I see some of the good things. There's not much good things coming out of COVID-19, but always looking for the happy rainbow or the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It is one of those things that has forced us to move significantly faster than we normally do move, and that's where I'm starting to see a lot of it, is trying to create individuals that are very much enhanced.
Great points. Yeah, and hopefully clear skies ahead with COVID and quite honestly the summer coming up, right? And rainbows, and hopefully we can get out of this. But the sea change with COVID is traumatic. I mentioned the change in the landscape, and from the panel here, great points on really the changes in where we've begun. Say 10 years ago with cybersecurity defense, and really much like static rules. So I remember writing snort rules back in the day, running Splunk logic as the age-old way to detect cybersecurity activity. And now we're moving towards behavioral and even AI methods to help with that. So I want to skip ahead a little bit for the next question and talk about use cases. So in which areas of AI, is in cybersecurity, what are some of the use cases you guys are using to thwart attacks, and how will those use cases evolve in the future, right? So if we could talk about those particular use cases of AI and implementation, and I'll start with you, Marcus. Maybe some interesting things coming down the road from Darktrace there.
Sure, and one of the first things I think goes to James's last point, and that's augmenting the human security team and supercharging some of that investigation. In fact, for us, it was deploying some supervised learning actually over the last 3 or 4 years, looking at our own analysts. We were able to deploy something that now is going out there and doing some of that triage and that investigation, right, which addresses some of that false positives, alert fatigue. Can you prioritize and have a narrative against what's happening that is very quickly than just a specific anomaly that has to be investigated, right? And how can we have that team starting from beginning their day from a point of action rather than a point of initial investigation, right? We mentioned a little bit about backgrounds, and as I mentioned, I've done counterterrorism for almost a decade. The most frustrating thing for me every day, and I know the CISOs across the board are seeing this, is am I marshaling and am I using my human resources, my critical human resources, in the most efficient way against the hardest and most difficult or most present problems, right? And having the AI assist with some of that investigation so that when they can come in, it's prioritized to a fair extent, investigated to a fair extent for them to move forward with that. It's not just, that attention deficit, but it's also morale, right? They're now spending their cycles on things that are credible threats rather than potential incidents, right? And that is significant, especially when you have so many coming in and you have all that happening in the background.
Absolutely. The human element, I just want to chime in real quick, is super important. And it's something I'm always considering when implementing AI, right? I'm always putting myself in the shoes of the analyst. How could the analyst use this to help them reduce their time? And then the burnout too, right? Unfortunately, our analysts are just so overwhelmed with the number of cases that they have to investigate. And it's high pressure every time, all the time, when they have to investigate. And, unfortunately in our industry, we're seeing a lot of turnover, and it's because of this, so burnout. So great points on the human element and how AI can assist, not take over, right? And be the partner to help out with some of those analysts. So, over to you, Marina, and that take and use cases.
Sure, absolutely. It's funny because when I was preparing, I was actually thinking about the human element, but from a slightly different perspective. I was looking at it in terms of um, AI being able to play an important role in identifying insider threat. And because AI, I think, is ideally suited to do that. It can aggregate and sift through data points from many, many different sources that a human or a human team actually would struggle to do, at least in the same time frame. And it can build a profile of typical behavior and then flag anomalies that are deviations essentially from that profile. And I think that one of the things that we have now, for better or worse, is that we have a lot more data that's readily available that wasn't as readily available 5 or even 10 years ago, right? So I think in building out, for instance, an insider threat profile, at least in financial services, you can leverage data like typical um, work hours, printing habits, typing speed, even GPS data, and all of that can be fed in to an AI to build a profile off of. But I think that, one of the most important caveats here is really that just because we can doesn't mean that we should, right? And so maybe that's sort of the legal/compliance hat going on. But I think that if we do decide to go down this path, it's really critically important in terms of how we go about it and the controls that we put in place. Because some of the decisions that are made off of it can result in discriminatory outcomes. And I think that we can easily see situations where an AI can inadvertently amplify biases. So for things like that, I think that firms are, at least I know in financial services, firms are increasingly looking at, how do we build out an insider threat program? And I think in doing that, forming an internal governance and oversight body that would be looking at the program from that privacy and data ethics perspective would be very helpful.
Yes, and there's vendors out there with UEBA, as you talk about the insider program, the user entity behavior analytics. Some working well, some others not. I think they have to attune to the internal environment. You make really good points about, should we even implement this in the first place? And those are the questions we have to ask as well, where it, may have an impact of privacy or compliance. And we've got to bring everybody to the table when we are making these decisions. And you know what? AI may not be the silver bullet or even the answer within itself. There's other methods. But James, I see you nodding your head quite a bit there on some of the points here. Feel free to chime in.
No, it's what you got, all really good points. I'll go back to, regression algorithms. One of the things we are really trying to do is make sure our analysts don't have information overload, and using regression algorithms to try to predict what's the next piece of information that person needs, so that they're getting the right information when they require it and not getting inundated with a bunch of information that's not relevant. Right now, we have a problem that we have too much information, and we need to actually get it filtered down so that the analyst only gets the information that they require. We've done a lot of work with UEBAs, and one of the things we have to be careful about is, especially when you're, say, starting to launch an investigation for insider threat, is false positives become very costly type thing if it turns out. One, the investigation costs a lot of money type thing, and two, there's reputational damage. There's a bunch of things. So I would be careful. I do think AI is great for, and especially machine learning, that will find patterns that humans will not be able to find. But false positives is a very clear and present danger type thing, and UEBAs are a great example of it type thing, right. In that investigations cost a lot of money, and there's reputational damage if they turn out to be false.
Great points, and it's almost that paralysis by analysis, right? Where we're feeding our analysts too much information. Who would have thought when I first started that I would be overwhelmed with data? But here we are, right? With big data and figuring out ways to best use it. And, you know, back to the analysts, always trying to improve their experience, right? And improve their skill set. So it's a blend of, you know, providing the right context and not too much context to assist them in their you know, investigation, and of course reducing that signal to noise ratio, which is always a challenge, especially when implementing data science in our domain. Want to switch gears a little
Brennan,
bit.
if I could just,
go ahead.
Can I just jump in, just one, and
Go for it.
as of all the points, and one is the importance of having trust and transparency in that AI as well, right? So, you know, your analyst needs to be able to look at why they didn't see something else, or be able to explore why they did see something. I think we have to be careful that it's not this black box that's showing up, hey, go look at this. You know, there has to be trust that's built and some ability to, from a transparency standpoint, see how they got there, right? Because I think you do have to be worried about it. You're distilling it so far down to just, here's the thing you should go see. And, you know, you have these experts, they need to be able to understand why, and they have insights that maybe others don't. So I think there's really some importance there, as well as keeping that human in the loop in terms of some level of decision making. To Marina's specific point, I think we can't hold over AI as like the silver bullet, as you said, but rather let's really think about how we're employing it, what levels of control and insight and trust we're building, and then build from there, because it's going to be able to do more. But I think you got to build into that transition.
Yeah, the transparency is super important, especially when I talk to some of the vendors and I ask, you know, what's your confusion matrix? What's your accuracy? What are the features you're using to implement some of the machine learning aspect? And, you know, they pedal back a bit, right? And say, well, it's, you know, that's intellectual property. Well, we got to come somewhere in the middle and be transparent, because we need to tune, we need to reduce those false positives and understand what data is really going in and, you know, getting out, right? The garbage in, garbage out theory. So great points there on the transparency. Anybody else want to chime in on some of the use cases, transparency, and you know, implementations that are going on in your worlds?
Sure, I can. I mean, I had a couple of, I guess, brief examples. So I think another use case might be um, where we move a little bit outside of cyber, and we leverage what we learn in AI for cyber, but in slightly different fields. So for instance, in financial services and in banking and broker-dealer land, there is a very significant supervisory oversight component. So this is something where it's largely manual, and I think is ripe for disruption in leveraging AI that can bring in information from various different different inputs, and essentially help the supervisor detect a problem faster and address it, because that can be incredibly useful in mitigating regulatory and reputational risks.
Great points on the compliance part. Want to shift gears here a little bit from use cases to talking about talent, cybersecurity talent. So those unicorns, right? In the AI and cybersecurity space, they're very limited. And as I mentioned earlier, you guys are in for a treat here with, you know, the panel folks on having that expertise and, you know, being able to use it in their career and succeed with it. Right. So my question to the panel here is, are there roles within your SIRT and SOC that are changing because of AI? Are the expertise, the talents adjusting to meet the demand of automation? And, you know, talking about some of the topics that we talked about earlier, the enrichment, the prediction on, you know, assisting the analysts. So I'll pass it over to you, James, on talent.
Yeah, so the biggest issue I find with, say, our cyber teams and SOCs is a lot of them have just believe AI or machine learning is just one big hype cycle. So they'll be like, we've been here before, 10 years ago, you know, they had expert systems. It was just a couple of if statements that attackers could figure out the ways around them. You know, go away type thing. What you got? If I just keep my head down, all you AI guys will go away in a couple of years when the hype cycle ends. So I know I do a lot of trying to, we call it, to create an AI-enabled workforce within D&D. So I give a lot of professional development presentations, but this is probably my most requested presentation, is where I just go through over an hour on why this is not a hype cycle, on why things like, say, deep learning is a revolutionary technology, and trying to get, and what you got, this, it is worth your time to invest to learn how AI systems work, to learn how machine learning systems work, to what you got, learn how deep learning systems work, to, you know, structure your data so that we can actually use it to train systems type thing. So what you got, that is what I find our biggest challenge is. Within D&D, we've worked more of trying to create our own workforce type thing, instead of trying to actually be part of the war for talent type thing. Like you said, it is kind of unicorns type thing that have both cybersecurity and AI expertise type thing. So we're trying to do a lot of it from within. But that is the biggest problem I've kind of run into as we try to introduce a lot of AI, and especially, say, the machine learning and deep learning technologies within D&D. And, you know, why is it important to structure your data? You know, that's our biggest challenge, is people just think it's a hype cycle, and that's where I spent actually most of my time trying to work with our workforce to try to destroy that that notion type thing.
Marcus, over to you. So you're chomping at the bit to chime in here. Go ahead.
Sure, I'm never one pain for not throwing my 2 cents in. But yeah, and again, James, great comments. I mean, I think in just the year that I've been kind of in that vendor space, which was in and of itself a whole weird jump for me after 23 years of public service, the ability to understand and recognize that AI is no longer just an emerging technology, but a present technology. And I think that comes also with how you couch what you're talking about when you're talking about AI. And whenever I'm talking about it, I'm very quick to say, when I'm talking about AI, I'm talking about the narrow AI, the complex task savant, thinking about that machine learning. It's not going to pass the Turing test, but it is very good for these bound complex problems, especially like cybersecurity, when you're coming at it the way that we do, which tends to be understanding your digital environment and then enforcing that normal, not trying to predict threat actors and threat attacks, which is, again, a bit of a flip of the other side of the coin of how complex that task and what you're trying to predict is. The second, in terms of the workforce and, you know, the skills that are out there, I think our approach has been, you know, making the AI as approachable as possible by any number of type of skill set, by giving it some model editing capability that actually doesn't alter the unsupervised learning, right? You're not playing with the AI, but you are able to get creative in terms of prioritizing things you care about and the model alerts that you're prioritizing, and have some to assist with some of that false positive or prioritization without putting the entire AI at risk or the unsupervised learning at risk, because you're kind of meddling with it, as it were. So really bringing more accessibility to the technology without necessarily having to have a super skilled workforce. Because you know, if you're talking about small and medium businesses, you're talking across scope, you're really not going to find those skills there, nor do they have the time to invest in them.
And Marina?
Yeah, I think excellent points, both James and Marcus. I think my perspective is slightly different, sort of coming from a legal and regulatory background. The biggest issue that I'm seeing in terms of talent is I guess a lack of tech fluency or tech savviness. And I think that it's something that sort of can no longer be ignored, right? Because even as we're seeing regulations like rules guidance develop, we're having conversations with senior management and with boards of directors. Phrases like access right controls and multi-factor authentication are coming up. So it's no longer okay to not know what those things mean. I think they need to sort of become part of our typical vernacular, and so there needs to be I think a little bit more work done to get folks up to sort of tech speed, because I think when you're speaking the same language, it helps a lot in terms of being able to partner across different teams, certainly with the IT divisions and with cybersecurity, and also just more generally in supporting businesses' digital transformation.
Yeah, and you mentioned that vernacular. Yeah, at Goldman, what I'm looking for with the talent of a data scientist, that term kind of means a lot of different things to a lot of different folks, right? So I find myself having to educate some of the folks that are in these disparate groups on what really data science is, and how it can help, and how it's not necessarily that silver bullet, but can be that assistant. And then when it comes to talent, I really see some of the translation of the engineering, where we've have these engineering folks in our SIRTs, our SOCs, that are doing the support for say Splunk or log management systems, or any of that data coming in. They have those fundamental skill sets of the system admin, really, to manage some of those products. And then we throw on top of that big data, which also falls under the umbrella of AI as well. And then using new tools like Hadoop and Spark, and some of those other big products out there. Now those are getting used by some of our engineers. And then what really is the icing on the cake, the cherry on top here, is for the data scientists to then use that big data, translate it in an ETL, and then align it back to what the analysts are doing day in and day out with their investigation work, and then using that to kind of sift or narrow down the signal to noise ratio by using data science implementations. So talked about supervised, unsupervised, anomalies, right? That's really what it is. It's not this Tesla kind of car that we're trying to build, right, to drive itself. There are small and easy wins, low hanging fruit, that we can use data science, and the combination of that thereof, and the talent, the engineering skill set, and really creativity, which I think plays really well into what makes a good data scientist. And of course the domain expertise. And you can't really pick a data scientist off the street and expect that they're going to know both cybersecurity, and with cybersecurity, the huge gamut of knowing a system, how to investigate a host, how to pull apart a PCAP. That's all in ground. That's all in play here for the data science implementations. So a combination that thereof, unicorn, right? It's almost next to impossible to find.
Yeah.
But you can break it apart and have different members on your team that are specializing in those expertise, and hopefully you can put the glue together to then implement some of those use cases.
Absolutely.
So, yep. Feel free to chime in, guys, on those comments.
Yeah, no, just what you got. I always find the best use case to really start, or really to get, say, senior management's attention, is just, predictive prioritization for patching. A nice, very easy AI use case type thing. Everyone has tried to automate the patching cycle for the last 20 years. It's one of those things everyone realizes, we need to do faster patching, with what you got. You don't need to worry about 0 days when your patching cycle is so horrid. But what you got, no one can really do it type thing. And it's just picking, small little things that's been a recurring problem, and then putting, artificial intelligence against it, or machine learning against it type thing, to show how you can significantly improve how fast it goes. And doing those quick wins, those low-hanging fruits, can really help sell AI within cybersecurity.
Yeah, just to jump on that. I mean, I think it's also like knowing what you want to apply it to, or the narrow problem you're trying to solve, rather than like, oh, we need data science, or oh, we need AI. Let's just bring it in and it'll tell us stuff, right? Rather than understanding what your mission focus is or what your gaps are. I think there's a blending there between that mission need and that technological enabling, right? Because you can bring all the technology, but if it doesn't have that output that's impactful to mission, people are going to wonder why that money's spent, right? And if mission's expecting something and magic doesn't come out because it's different than what the mission needs, I think there has to be connective tissue between those two elements for it to be successful and a successful deployment.
All right, administrative wise, I know we've got 3 minutes left, and we got some interesting Q&A. So for the participants here, feel free to post in that Q&A, but I'll toss it over to the panel to take a quick look at the Q&A and, see if they want to answer any of those really great questions.
So I'll grab the first one just because it's the top in terms of concerns over false positive, yes, and what about false negatives, and how to make sure you catch the real threats as accurately as possible. And I think that really goes to the application of how you're thinking about AI and cybersecurity. I alluded to it a little earlier. I think trying to use AI or really focusing on threat prediction or attack prediction, you get into a very bad space in terms of false negatives or missing next generation, because I think it's much harder to predict. And in fact, I'll put a plug for the next panel, which is offensive AI. I think that's not only going to be scale and scope, that's going to be really unpredictable in terms of how those attacks are going to come when they start to really kind of get up and running in terms of embracing AI. So I think it is more about, bounding those problems and trying to look inward and understanding and enforcing. So you're only dealing with anomalies within your environment that are caused by threats, rather than trying to predict what the threat is their actor is going to do, because I think it's going to increasingly become very, very hard.
James or Marina, you want to jump in on any of these really good questions here?
So I think I can jump in on one. I think I saw one about data ethics come up. And, we have like 2 minutes left, so I don't know I can't answer it, I think, to any degree of detail. But what I was thinking about when I said data ethics and what I'm seeing coming out in terms of draft regulations out of the EU, and I think with, certain discussions that are already starting with the US regulators as well, is really in terms of making sure that, as I said previously, that we don't amplify bias unintentionally, that the data that we're leveraging is data that we're permitted to leverage, right? So for instance, in financial services, we collect a good amount of information, and the folks that we collect it from are providing it for a certain purpose. So we need to be thinking about what our intent is when we're leveraging it in various AI cases, and whether those individuals would have been comfortable that the data is being used in that way. I think separately, we also need to think about, how can we cleanse data sets so that we're not exposing PII, so that we're not using information that's inherently biased and only picking out the elements that we need in order to run the types of analytics that we're looking for that ultimately should inform decision making and frankly, effectively either enhance the consumer experience or bolster the controls that we have internally. So those are the types of things that I was looking at when I was saying data ethics, and I think that nobody's really got a good handle on it just yet, but the conversations are ramping up, and governance and oversight are going to be significant.
Yeah, I know we're right close on time, but I do think that Mika Wiley has a really good question in the chat about where to implement AI within cybersecurity pre or post-production. Looking at it from an architectural point of view, the whole concept of making sure that you almost have a feedback loop within your cybersecurity architecture really will make sure that you are able to implement AI in the future, or at least machine learning algorithms, but you got to really sort through your data. So making sure that your architecture within cybersecurity is, some kind of a feedback loop, whether it's done pre or post-production type thing. It's obviously everything's always easier if it's done pre-production type thing, but as long as your architecture has kind of feedback loops in it, and you can use a lot of the feedback loops from, say, your analytic programs and things like that, but getting structuring things in a feedback loop will make implementing AI within cybersecurity far easier.
Great. And with that, thanks to the participants here. Great questions, great answers from our panel. And I want to thank again, Michael, for bringing us all together, and AI4, and for everybody joining, and your interest in AI and cybersecurity, a sexy topic. Hopefully we were able to clear the air on some of the items out there, in the myths and the trade. But I had a blast, and it was a lot of fun. So, thank you again, and I'll pass it over to Michael.
Thanks so much. You all crushed it. Thank you very much for being here. So as the other panel joins us, I like to end with a one-word little thing. So AI, cybersecurity, you have one word. What do you think? Go. Brennan, hit me.
Sexy.
Sexy. Marina.
Powerful.
Powerful. Marcus.
Critical.
Critical. James. Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute, James. What's the word?
Sorry, what you got? My when I was clicking it, type thing wouldn't go. But what you got? The future.
Future.
The
Boom.
one last they took all the good ones.
Sexy, powerful, critical future. I'm with it. All right, we have our second panel coming in here. So thank you to the 4 of you for being here, and I'll talk to you all soon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank you very
guys.
much.